j'ai une annonce à faire. Donc, nous avons le document PC28 somme 3 dans les 3 langues qui est disponible. Nous avons également les documents PC28 comme 3, 4, 5 et 6 disponibles dans les 3 langues. Voilà, donc nous allons commencer par le point 34 de l'agenda qui est relatif aux rapports régionaux. Donc pour je demanderai aux membres qui présenteront les rapports régionaux que je vous accorde 2 à 3 minutes. Merci. Région Afrique, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Chair. Madam Chair, thank you for allowing us to present regional report at PC28. Madam Chair, we apologize for not submitting the main report on time to the Secretariat as per rules and the procedures of the meeting. But we thank parties that contributed to the report. Madam Chair, there are several activities accomplished by the African region, but now I'm going to mention just a few. We have carried out a review of second trade for 3 species of Appendix 2, which are under RST process. We acknowledge and thank parties that RST process has been removed. We also participated in activities related to periodic review of trade for 3 species listed in Appendix 2 of the Convention with the aim of ensuring that the national trade in these species is sustainable and compliant with the provision of Article 4 of the Convention. Madam Chair, we have also developed projects that were submitted for funding consideration through the CITES 3 species program, and the 7 projects have been shortlisted. We have also developed non-developmental findings for various 3 species, in particular to rosewood species in various range states. We have also conducted preliminary survey on the conservation status and the distribution of woody cycads in Zimbabwe's Eastern Highlands. Madam Chair, we have also conducted an inventory mission of Gibbotria species to facilitate development of NDFs in the range states. We have also carried out capacity building activities in various areas, including one in combating illegal timber trade along the transport corridors to borders, but also training on detection, seizure, and investigation procedures, the CITES legal frameworks, and the identification of CITES listed species, targeting forestry and other relevant law enforcement officers. We have also participated in SADC regional workshops in the Southern Africa Wildlife Trade Report. Madam Chair, we all have been also involved in awareness campaigns to communities to reduce illegal harvesting of cycad plant from the wild, but also we have been involved in training communities, champions for conservation of protected plants. Madam Chair, Africa region congratulates you for well accomplishment of the agenda within time. Though we know that the agendas were very heavy, but it is because of the gain experience. We are also so proud of you as our ambassador in this position. Madam Chair, we also acknowledge continued coordination by CITES Secretariat, but also all conservation partners for their support for various conservation activities in Africa. In that regard, we would like the Plants Committee to take note of the report. Thank you, Chair.
Merci aux représentants de la région Afrique. Je passe la parole à l'Asie.
Good morning, Chair, and thank you. And the Asia regional representatives compiled information from parties and submitted the regional report as contained in PC 28 Doc 34.2. Although we still have a lot to discuss today, I want to express our sincere gratitude to all Asian parties for their continued support and active participation. And we also hope to hear from our colleagues more frequently and receive timely responses so that we can serve the region better. Thank you all.
Merci à la représentante de la région Asie. Je donne maintenant la parole à la région Amérique centrale, du Sud et Caraïbes.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Nuestra región también presentó el informe regional a tiempo y tuvo participación de varios países de la región. Somos muchos y con muchísimas actividades, aunque es difícil resumir todas las actividades que tenemos. Un poco quería mencionar que algunos países están trabajando en la implementación de emisión de permisos electrónicos que se están articulando con las aduanas, las áreas de comercio y las ventanillas únicas de comercio exterior. También algunas partes presentaron enmiendas a los apéndices en la COP20, las cuales fueron aprobadas. Por ejemplo, Argentina para el Podocarpus parlatorei, que fue siguiendo el proceso de revisión periódica, se pasó del apéndice 1 al apéndice 2. También Chile presentó la incorporación en el apéndice 1 de una especie nativa de ellos que están trabajando fuertemente ahora en la implementación. Y también se realizaron varios DEM en la región. Argentina y Paraguay están trabajando con los DEM de Palo Santo. Brasil está trabajando con los de Cedrela, Dipteris, Androdanthus, Tabebuia. Otras actividades que realizó, por ejemplo, Chile, están trabajando también en varias elaboraciones de dictámenes de extracción no perjudicial. Colombia fue una de los países seleccionados para un proyecto sobre especies arbóreas de CITES, que como resultado se encuentra en fase de formulación de un proyecto de fortalecimiento de la gestión y gobernanza forestal para especies del género Dipteris. También se encuentran trabajando en los DEMs de Cedrela, Dipteris y Androdanthus. Costa Rica se encuentra trabajando en los DEM de Androdanthus, Roseodendron y Tabebuia. El Salvador se encuentra actualmente en el proceso de modernización de digitalización para la emisión de permisos y certificados CITES, y Panamá elaboró el DEM para Dipteris oleifera. También quiero mencionar que Perú está trabajando con la elaboración de los dictámenes de extracción perjudicial para varias de sus especies. No quiero seguir, tengo mucho detalle de información y para cumplir con el tiempo que tenemos, les pido por favor que los que estén interesados puedan ver el documento que presentamos y agradecer la oportunidad que tengo por primera vez a la región de representarlos. Muchas gracias.
Merci à la représentante de la région Amérique centrale, du Sud et Caraïbes. La parole est maintenant à la région Europe.
Thank you, Chair. It is my pleasure to share the regional report for Europe on behalf of my co-representative Nolene Smith and our alternates Daniel Wolf and Sonia Danda. The report was compiled by inviting all parties in the region to contribute against the standard reporting template, and I thank parties for their input and encourage parties who could not contribute this time to do so ahead of PC29. Rather than read the report in full, let me highlight 4 threads. First, medicinal and aromatic plants are increasingly prominent part of European plant trade, much of it online. Switzerland reports seizures almost every week of e-commerce products containing Prunus africana and rising imports of Rhodiola rosea. The United Kingdom, with traffic, has analyzed e-commerce supply chains for CITES-listed medicinal plant species. This is a growing enforcement and identification challenge. Second, the tree species and non-detriment findings strongly feature in the report. Germany continues to fund the CITES tree species program and has supported regional NDF workshops for timber with the ITTO. And several parties are developing guidance on recent annotations, including annotation 19 for Commiphora YT and annotation 10 for Paubrasilia echinata. Third, the region invested in coordination and capacity building, centered on the 11th CITES European Regional Plants Meeting hosted by Ireland at University College Dublin in June 2025, alongside customs and enforcement training in several parties. Fourth, the region continues to strengthen the science base from public scientific assessments of listing proposals to new molecular research on the sustainability of wild orchid harvesting. Chair, on behalf of the region, I invite the committee to take note of document PC 28 doc 34.4. Thank you.
Merci aux représentants de la région Europe. Je donne maintenant la parole aux représentants de la région Amérique du Nord.
Merci, Madame. I will present the highlights provided by the countries of our region, starting with Canada, that in late 25, Canada released a guide to identify exotic wood species with a focus on CITES list species as well as non-CITES list lookalike tree species. The guide is available in English and French. This was shared as an information document number 62 at COP20, and the download link can be also found on the COP20 website. This guide is intended to help and assist enforcement officers identifying exotic wood species during inspections. It combines characteristics like color, odor, and end grain with modern scientific methods to support rapid practical decisions in making in the field. The guide enables officers to perform initial triage of wood shipments to determine whether they should be released, detained, or seized, and whether further expert identification by accredited laboratories is needed. It is designed to be simple, user-friendly, and requires minimal technical knowledge, focusing on tree species that are protected by CITES lookalike list species, or those that are high value and potentially part of illegal trade. Also, in the case of Mexico, as some of you saw in the side event last Monday, Mexico highlights that in August 25, after almost 25 years of work with Candelilla, Formiatis syphilitica, the first ever Forest Stewardship Council certification of a non-timber species by the Forest Management Council on semi-arid ecosystems was given to 3 communities from Coahuila State that cover 80,000 hectares for Candelilla wax production. This sets a global reference on extractions under sustainability, legality, and traceability criteria, as well as benefit for communities. Available information on 10 to 15 years of monitoring data indicates that more than 85% of ejidos managing Candelilla have maintained or increased their density biomass. In the case of the U.S., the U.S. highlights the support, the effective implementation of the COM20 inclusions and revised annotation 10 for wood and wood products made from Pernambuco, Pau Brasile Equinata. The management and scientific authorities of the U.S. have taken several important steps to engage U.S. stakeholders impacted by these changes. This includes attending the annual National Association of Music Merchants Convention and the International Wood Products Association World of Wood Convention, and joint informational webinar on the League of American Orchestras. The U.S. Department of Agriculture Forest Service conduct a series of capacity building activities for CITES list 3 species in Asia, Latin America, and Africa that may be of interest to the Plants Committee. The details are, of course, in document 34.5. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci à la région Amérique du Nord. Enfin, la parole aux représentants de la région Océanie.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to present the report in PC 28, Doc 34.6 on CITES-related activities and priorities across the Oceania region. I am grateful for the contributions provided by Australia, New Zealand and Samoa, and encourage other parties to contribute ahead of PC 29. I recognise the ongoing commitment shown by parties across the region that includes 9 CITES parties, a number of non-parties, and several overseas territories spread across a vast and geographically dispersed area. In preparing this report, I've sought to reflect both the opportunities and the pressures facing Oceania. It is worth noting that marine resources remain central to the livelihoods, cultures, and economies of many Pacific communities, while our plant species continue to face increasing pressure from climate change, invasive species, land use change, and international trade demand, particularly for endemic species. Key matters for the region include the development of robust, non-detriment findings, timber traceability, capacity building, and continued support for building enduring regional cooperation. I wish to highlight the important progress being made through Samoa's marine and biodiversity planning, Australia's world-first coral traceability system, New Zealand's reform of its trade and endangered species legislation, regional work on threatened plants and tree species assessments, and continued efforts to strengthen CITES implementation for across Oceania. I also wish to acknowledge the valuable support provided by the Secretariat of the Regional Environment Program to parties and non-parties in the region. I also acknowledge and thank the Secretariat for your support for CITES implementation and the important contributions made by our colleagues, including Dr. Hugh Robinson of New Zealand and former Oceania Representative and Vice Chair of the CITES Animals Committee, who received wonderful acknowledgement in the Animals Committee last week. His contribution to plant matters is also substantial. I also wish to thank Karen Baird at SPREP for many years' support, and I wish them both well for the future. I also welcome Martin Heitzager, formerly of the CITES Secretariat, who since the last PC meeting has joined SPREP and has quickly become a welcome and valuable member of the Oceania family. Thank you, Chair.
Je remercie le représentant de la région Océanie. Donc, nous venons de suivre la présentation succincte des rapports nationaux qui étaient présentés au point 34 de l'agenda. Je peux conclure que le comité a pris note des rapports régionaux. Donc, ce point est clos. Alors, pour la suite de la session, je vous propose une pause de 30 minutes qui vous permettrait de prendre connaissance des documents PC28 Somme 3, PC28 Com 3, 4, 5 et 6 qui sont disponibles. Est-ce que cela vous convient ? Je ne vois pas d'objection. Donc, il est 9h30. Nous allons reprendre à 10h. Je vous remercie. Alors, nous allons commencer par l'examen du document PC28, somme 3. Puis, nous allons examiner le PC26 comme 6 sur l'identification des bois. Après, nous allons examiner le point PC28, doc 16 sur le matériel d'identification des spécimens d'espèces inscrites aux annexes de la CITES. Et enfin, nous allons terminer avec les points PC28 comme 3 à 5. Alors, concernant le document PC28, somme 3, j'espère que vous avez eu le temps d'analyser tous ces documents. Je passe la parole aux membres du comité. PC28, somme 3. Pas de demande de parole. Parti ayant statut d'observateur. Chine.
Thank you, Chair. With reference to the PC 828, Sum 3, Item 31 on the membership of the intersessional working group, we note that China is not currently reflected among the members. If agreeable to the committee, China would appreciate be included in the intersessional working group. Thank you, Chair.
Oui, la Chine, vous serez ajouté à ce groupe intercession et la modification sera reflétée dans le somme PC28, somme 4. La liste de demandes de parole est ouverte. Observateur. Botanical Garden International.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to note that in paragraph 20, oh, hang on, in 31 under nomenclature, it's Miss Klopper, not Mr., the nomenclature specialist. It's titled there Mr.
Merci pour cette remarque. Y a-t-il d'autres demandes de parole? Non. Aussi, le comité adopte le PC 28 somme 3 avec la modification apportée. Merci. Donc, comme annoncé, nous allons examiner le PC 28 comme 6. Je donne la parole au président du groupe de travail, le représentant de la région Afrique. Ah non, il était coprésident. Donc, mais plutôt à la région Europe. Madame, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of the in-session working group on the identification of timber and other wood products, I have the pleasure of reporting back to you all. The group was co-chaired by my colleague and representative for Africa, Mr. Malama. We had parties, intergovernmental and non-governmental partners in the meeting, and timber and musical instrument sectors, and I thank all the participants for their constructive engagement. The group worked through 7 tasks in its mandate under Decision 19.147 Rev COP 20, and I will summarise the main outcomes as follows. On Mandate A, the prioritised list of species, the group reviewed the annex for a priority shortlist, and in particular Apsilia, Dalbergia sisu, highlighted in particular, Dipteryx, tree gubertia species, Handroentis, Kaya, Prunus africana, Pterocarpus, and Rosiodendron were identified. But the group also noted that this list needs further refinement and reflection, basically drawing on the work of previous prioritisation, such as work in the Rosewood Working Group, the CITES Tree Species Programme, and the Neotropical and African Tree Species Working Group reports. On Mandate B, on the reference samples, the group recommends encouraging parties to establish regional centres of excellence, to invest in xyleria where these are lacking, and to engage with the wood industry and NGOs. And it asks for the Standing Committee for its advice on expediting the exchange of vouchered reference samples, including through possible resolutions such as ResConf 1115 on certificates of scientific exchange. On Mandate C, on techniques and standards, the group underlines that no single technique meets all of our identification needs and that the assessment of techniques requires further work, noting copyright, expert identification considerations for new and emerging methods. On the Mandate D and I, the group recommended the Secretariat publish the standard wood sample collection form and the identified databases and reference links as resources as they become available and add them to the repository, with the reminder and caveat that the inclusion does not imply endorsement by the Plants Committee or nor the Secretariat. On Mandate E, on best practice, the group points that no one sample or method can fit all, and that more standard forensic analysis is needed for cases with legal implications, which must be underpinned by verified reference material. And we also need to stress the training of the next generation of wood identification specialists. Chair, finally, the group recommends that the progress here be reported to the Standing Committee at its 81st meeting, and that the committee here establish an intersessional working group to carry some of this work forward. Thank you.
Merci à la coprésidente du groupe de travail sur l'identification du bois et autres produits du bois. Je donne maintenant la parole aux membres du comité qui souhaitent intervenir. Je n'ai pas de demande de parole. Parti ayant statut d'observateur. Pas de demande de parole. Observateur. Pas de demande de parole. Aussi, à l'issue des travaux de ce groupe de travail, il y a eu un certain nombre de recommandations qui nous ont été proposées, dont l'établissement d'un groupe de travail. Je pense qu'on va procéder étape par étape pour... Ok. Donc, le comité pour les plantes convient des recommandations qui sont formulées par le groupe de travail, y compris l'établissement d'un groupe de travail en intersession pour lequel nous allons passer à la composition. Le mandat de ce groupe de travail est au paragraphe 8 des recommandations. Ce groupe de travail sera coprésidé par le représentant de la région Afrique et la représentante de la région Europe, si vous êtes toujours d'accord. Et nous allons maintenant passer à la composition de ce groupe de travail. Alors, quels sont les membres du comité qui souhaitent prendre part à ce groupe de travail intercession? Vous avez la parole. Pas d'autres membres. Partis ayant statut d'observateur, la liste est ouverte. Allemagne, Suisse, Cambodge, Gabon, Afrique du Sud. Cambodge, vous pouvez éteindre votre micro, s'il vous plaît. Royaume-Uni, Brésil, Tanzanie, Canada, Chine, États-Unis, République de Corée, Fédération de Russie, Ghana, Italie, Laos, PDR, Indonésie, France, Kenya, Zambie, Cameroun, Portugal et Irlande. Cameroun et Portugal, pouvez-vous éteindre Portugal, votre micro? Merci. Maintenant, nous passons aux observateurs. CFI, SSN, Forest Base, ONUDC, Traffic, Taylor Guitars, IWPA, ITTO, Violin Makers, IPCIFR, Violin Makers, je vous ai déjà cité, vous pouvez éteindre le micro. Merci. Le groupe de travail est ainsi établi. Cameroun, vous souhaitez prendre la parole?
Merci Madame la Présidente. Nous pouvons apporter un rectificatif suite à un glissement de notre plaquette. Nous avons d'abord appuyé Cambodge au lieu de Cameroun. Après, nous allons corriger plus tard.
D'accord. Donc le Cambodge ne fait pas partie de la liste des partis ayant statut d'observateur dans la composition de ce groupe de travail. Cambodia, you have to remove. Merci, Cameroun. Donc, le document PC 28 comme 6 est adopté. Le comité pour les plantes adopte le document PC 28 comme 6. Alors, maintenant, nous passons au point PC 28 Doc 16. Ce document a été préparé par le secrétariat qui va nous le présenter. Secrétariat, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Chair. Document PC 28 Doc 16 provides the Plants Committee with information relating to the implementation of the decisions on materials for the identification of specimens of CITES listed species. This includes responses to a notification to the parties published by the Secretariat as required in the decisions on this topic. The document contains 5 annexes presenting information on identification materials used by parties, materials requiring updates, challenges experienced in using ID materials, gaps in existing identification materials, and additional materials used by parties that were not included in the inventory circulated by the Secretariat through the notification. The Plans Committee is invited to establish an intersessional working group as requested in the decision. The proposed mandate is outlined in paragraph 8 of the document. The committee is invited to take into consideration the intersessional working group that was established on timber and wood products under COM 6. Thank you.
Merci au secrétariat. Membres du comité, je vous invite à prendre la parole. Pas de demande de parole. Parti ayant statut d'observateur, la liste est ouverte. Suisse, vous avez la parole.
Sorry, madam. We wanted to be in the working group, in the sessional working group. So sorry.
Ok, Suisse, vous reviendrez tout à l'heure. Gabon, c'est...
Merci Madame la Présidente. Le Gabon remercie le secrétariat et les membres du groupe de travail pour les travaux réalisés sur le matériel d'identification. Notre délégation reconnaît que le Gabon n'a pas transmis de réponse au questionnaire adressé aux parties. Nous considérons donc que les besoins nationaux du Gabon ne sont pas encore suffisamment documentés pour présenter à ce stade des priorités techniques définitives. Cependant, notre participation au groupe de travail nous a permis de constater l'importance de cette question, notamment pour les pays producteurs et exportateurs de bois. Le Gabon soutient la création du groupe de travail intersertion. Nous souhaitons que ce groupe puisse recevoir des contributions complémentaires, en particulier de la part des pays africains et francophones qui ne sont pas représentés dans les réponses reçues. Le Gabon propose d'engager une consultation nationale avec les administrations forestières, des douanes, les autorités CITES et les institutions scientifiques afin de préciser ses besoins, notamment pour l'identification des grumes, des sillages et des produits du bois transformé. À ce stade, nous recommandons simplement que les futurs outils soient pratiques, accessibles aux agents de terrain, scientifiquement fiables et disponibles dans les langues de travail de la Convention. Je vous remercie.
Je remercie le représentant du Gabon. Je ne vois pas d'autres demandes de parole. Aussi, j'invite les observateurs à s'exprimer s'ils le souhaitent. Pas de demande de parole. Je vous reviens pour la conclusion.
Envoyez-moi ça ici.
Merci de votre patience. Je voudrais juste signaler que lors de l'examen du point PC 28 comme 6, nous avons établi un groupe de travail intercession avec un mandat spécifique sur l'identification du bois et d'autres produits, autres produits du bois. Et à l'instant, avec l'examen du point 16 à l'ordre du jour, il y a également un groupe de travail qui est établi. Aussi, pour éviter le chevauchement des mandats, je vous propose de retirer dans le mandat du groupe de travail sur le matériel d'identification des espèces inscrites sur les listes de la dans les annexes de la CITES. Donc ça revient au point 8A des recommandations. Et donc on dirait ce qui se lirait ainsi: examiner les informations fournies par les parties en réponse à la notification aux parties publiée par le secrétariat et dont il est question dans la décision 20-120, excluant les informations figurant dans le document PC28 Doc 16 et ses annexes. Parce que cette partie fait référence au groupe de travail intercession que nous avons créé dans le PC 28 comme 6. Et nous avons également une modification à apporter dans les recommandations 8B. Alors, en français, c'est préparer une proposition en vue de la sélection de matériel d'identification à examiner et de nouveaux matériels à développer en priorité en tenant compte du mandat du groupe de travail intercession sur le bois et les produits de bois. Voilà, ça serait les amendements qui seraient apportés au mandat du groupe de travail sur le matériel d'identification des spécimens d'espèces inscrites aux annexes de la CITES. Est-ce que j'ai été assez claire? Donc je demande aux membres du groupe, aux membres du comité, leur avis sur les modifications apportées. Je ne vois pas de demande de parole des membres du groupe, des membres du comité. Je donne la parole aux États-Unis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Apologies, I'm not quite following. The elements of the ID materials document would be moved to the timber ID working group, but that would just be related to CITES listed tree species. Am I correct? Because the ID materials is bigger than CITES listed tree species. Thank you.
Merci, États-Unis. En fait, vous voyez, nous avons deux groupes de travail intercession qui ont été établis. Enfin, pour l'instant, nous avons un groupe de travail intercession qui est établi et ce groupe de travail porte sur l'identification du bois et autres produits de bois. Puis, nous avons à établir un groupe de travail sur le matériel d'identification des spécimens inscrits aux annexes de la CITES. Pour éviter un chevauchement des mandats des deux groupes de travail, ce que nous voulons faire, c'est qu'on a un groupe de travail intercession spécifique pour le bois, un groupe de travail sur les espèces inscrites aux annexes de la CITES hors bois, puisque c'est déjà couvert par le groupe de travail intercession qui a été établi durant l'examen du PC 28 comme 6. C'est clair? D'accord. Belgique, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Chair, and my sincerest of apologies. It has been a long 2 weeks. There was some confusion on my side. Would it be possible to still be added to the working group on identification of timber species, please? Thank you.
Let's just confirm.
Oui. Alors, je vais revenir au PC 26, non, PC 28, doc 16. Est-ce que vous convenez des amendements qui ont été apportés au mandat du groupe intercession que nous allons établir, donc le groupe de travail intercession sur les matériels d'identification des espèces inscrites aux annexes de la CITES? Pas d'objection. Donc ce groupe de travail sera présidé conjointement par la représentante de la région Europe, Madame Noline Smith, et par le représentant de la région Afrique, Monsieur Celestino Peter Balama. Maintenant, j'ouvre la liste aux membres de ce groupe de travail, en commençant par les membres du comité. Asie, Europe, pas d'autres demandes. Je passe maintenant aux partis ayant statut d'observateur. Mexique, Brésil, États-Unis, Afrique du Sud, Chine, Suisse, Zimbabwe, Royaume-Uni, Laos-PDR, République de Corée, Fédération de Russie, Canada, Zambie, Gabon, Tanzanie, Ghana, Cameroun, Namibie, Indonésie, France. Maintenant, les observateurs. CFFI, UNODC, European Soundmakers, ITTO, SSN, IPCIFR, IWPA, Violin Makers. Ainsi, le groupe de travail intercession sur les matériels d'identification des spécimens d'espèces inscrites aux annexes de la CITES est établi, et le groupe de travail, le comité pour les plantes convient des recommandations telles que formulées au paragraphe 8 avec les amendements apportés en session du document PC 28 doc 16. Merci. Le point PC 28 doc 16 est clos. Nous passons maintenant à l'examen des documents PC 28 com 3 à 5. PC 28 com 3. Ce groupe de travail CITES et forêt a été présidé par le représentant de la région Afrique. Non, pardon, a été présidé par le représentant de la région Amérique du Nord. Vous avez la parole pour nous présenter ce document.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good morning to everybody. I wish to thank all the participants of the working group for the collaboration to fulfill our mandate, and to Isabel Camarena from CITES Secretariat for her support and guidance. It was a very productive session. First, we work on the table in Annex 2 of Working Document 10 regarding the terms applicable to trade terms, codes, units, and explanations most relevant to specimens of 3 species from the guidelines for the preparation and submission of CITES annual reports. There were concrete suggestions to adjust and align 11 out of 20 terms that you can see on the table in the document COM3. And while doing that exercise, the working group identified inconsistencies between sources that refers to those terms. So with the help of Sophie from the Secretariat Legal Unit, she provided guidance to clarify that the text of the convention and the interpretation section of the appendices are the highest hierarchy, followed by resolutions, the guidelines, and finally the glossary, so in that sequence. With that in mind, will the Secretariat work on the adjustments for those 11 terms? The working group thus recommends the Plans Committee forward these revisions to the guidelines to the Standing Committee at its 81st meeting for its consideration to strengthen and improve reliability of information on trade in specimens of CITES list 3 species in the CITES trade database, and to invite its views and recommendations from an enforcement perspective and from the perspective of the Standing Committee's intersessional working group on annotations. Regarding the second part of our mandate, we scan the key considerations from the interdisciplinary study one by one. There were 3 tables to determine its applicability as to ensure that any measures support the timely and effective implementation of the CITES Forest Compendium. There were also some adjustments to improve clarity and avoid redundancy, but in general, the working group considered the key considerations useful to strengthen the implementation of the compendium. It is worth noting that for some participants, recommend exploring an expansion of the scope of plant species beyond the tree species, and delete key consideration 1.2 about maintaining the current species level focus of the CITES mandate. Also, you can find the details in the second table of COM3 document. Regarding the last part of our mandate, as we move to the key considerations, the working group identified that some of them already provide guidance on collaboration with CPF, and also recommends the Plans Committee to acknowledge that on the basis of the findings of the interdisciplinary study, ITTO and FAO have the most consistent institutional and technical alignment with CITES in the forestry domain, especially in relation to non-determined findings, traceability, and guidelines for legal and sustainable use and trade. Finally, Madam Chair, the working group also recommends, including in the report to the Standing Committee, the acknowledgement about the potential challenges for the timely and effective implementation of the CITES and Forest Compendium, including resource mobilizations and means of implementation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci au président du groupe de travail CITES et Forêt. Les membres du comité, vous êtes invités à prendre la parole pour d'éventuels commentaires. Asie, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Asia thanks the chair of the working group on CITES and Forest, Senor Ezequiel Benitez Diaz, for his leadership and for guiding the discussions on this important topic. We have reviewed the proposed hierarchy for updating definitions and guidelines relevant to reporting trade in CITES-listed trade species, and thanks Sophie for her assistance. While we support the general structure, we note that the hierarchy references Resolution CONF 11.17 on national reports, but does not include two resolutions that contain essential technical definitions for this specific sector. So we kindly recommend that the hierarchy explicitly include the resolution CONF 10.13, RevCOF 20 on implementation of the Convention for Tree Species, and resolution CONF 16.10, RevCOP 20 on implementation on the Convention for agarwood producing taxa, which include the agreed glossary for Aquilaria and Gerinopis. These resolutions contain sector-specific definitions that should guide any updates of reporting definitions for tree species, and their omission could lead to inconsistent interpretation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci à la représentante de la région Asie. Donc nous avons noté que vous voulez que les résolutions COP 10.13 REV COP 20 et COP 16.10 REV COP 20 soient ajoutées aux recommandations. Donc vos prochains commentaires devraient tenir compte aussi de cet amendement. Je ne vois pas d'autres demandes de parole par les membres du comité. Je donne la parole aux partis ayant statut d'observateur. Pas de demande de parole. Observateur. Pas de demande de parole. Donc nous allons conclure sur ce point. Donc le comité pour les plantes convient des recommandations apportées par le groupe de travail CITES et Forêt, telles qu'amendées en plénière. Merci. Nous passons au PC 28 comme 4. Il s'agit du groupe de travail sur Pao Brasilia et Kenata, qui a été coprésidé par le représentant de la région Amérique centrale et du Sud et Caraïbes, M. Beltelton Chacon, et Canada, Mme Aline Decken. Je donne la parole au président. Alors, Canada.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to begin by thanking my co-chair, Mr. Cesar Beltelton Chacon, the members of the working group, and the Secretariat for their support. So item A was to consider the terms of reference for the study on traceability. A number of items were discussed, and we agreed to increase the scope of the study. A few highlights from the additions. First, we clarified the study shall distinguish bows according to the CITES status of the wood used in their manufacturing. So pre-convention, bows legally acquired after the initial CITES listing in 2007, and bows for which the status cannot be reliably established. Second, more traceability systems were proposed for this study, and this includes chain of custody and stock management mechanisms, inspection, audit, and verification procedures, mandatory stock declaration and validation, and establishing an international and harmonized verifiable traceability system. Note that we are not recommending any particular approach at this time. Rather, we are suggesting to explore all of the options to see what would be the best option for this species and for parties. Finally, an item proposed for the conversion factors study related to integrating conversion factors into a traceability system was moved into this study to better align with scope. For item B of our mandate, to study the terms of reference for the study on conversion factors, we added precisions regarding data collection techniques and options for estimates to be developed should species-specific data not be available. We specified that conversion factors may be expressed as technical ranges and added details regarding limitations and appropriate use of conversion factors once available. And we also included a section on deliverables, which will include a report and also a data set so that the conversion factors could be recalculated in the future if needed should more information become available. Finally, for item C of our mandate, we discussed the current production systems in use for Pao Brasilia and Brazil's domestic implementation of source codes A and Y. We came to the conclusion that no issues have been identified at the range state at this time. However, should any importing parties who are not participating in the working group identify further specific issues, Brazil invited these parties to reach out bilaterally for engagement. We also suggest to reconsider whether we need to revisit this item once the results of the studies are available. Merci, Madame Chair.
Merci à la représentante du Canada. Y a-t-il des demandes de parole de la part des membres du comité? Région Océanie.
Thank you, Chair. I thank the member from Central South America and the Caribbean and Canada for their exceptional co-chairing of the working group. Oceania welcomes work that supports the implementation of the Convention and the sustainable trade of endemic species of plants. While I welcome the proposed work contained in ComDoc 4, I'm concerned that the terms of reference for the scope of the study into traceability and development of conversion factors has broadened substantially and potentially beyond the ability of the CITES Secretariat to fund this work within the estimated cost in the document and the current resourcing available. I expect that it may be unlikely for the Secretariat to calculate the anticipated cost of this package of work specifically, but it may still be useful for parties and observer organisations that are asked to contribute to understand the potential cost of undertaking such work. I'd recommend the Secretariat consider the revised scope and, if possible, maybe update the estimated value of $30,000 to $50,000 so that we may better reflect the expanded scope presented in the ComDoc. If we cannot raise sufficient funds at this time, potentially a phased approach while we do raise funds could be an option, but I leave it in parties and observers' organisations' hands to contribute. Thank you, Chair.
Je remercie le représentant de la région Océanie pour ses commentaires, ses observations. Je ne vois pas d'autres demandes de parole de la part des membres du comité. Non. Amérique centrale, du Sud et Caraïbes, vous avez la parole.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. Agradecemos los comentarios del representante de Oceanía. Yo quiero dejar patente la posición de América Central, del Sur y el Caribe, en cuanto a que este tipo de trabajos son fundamentales para abordar las múltiples inclusiones que hemos tenido de géneros para las especies arbóreas que son origen de nuestra región y que creemos nosotros que el coste que pueda llevar a cabo este estudio está ampliamente justificado en cuanto a la experiencia que se va a obtener, que pueda ser aplicable o replicable a todos los grupos de especies arbóreas. En ese sentido, queremos dejar patente que la inversión que se haga en un trabajo como el propuesto en los términos de referencia justifica ampliamente su costo. Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Merci. Le représentant de la région Amérique centrale, du Sud et Caraïbes pour vos commentaires. Je ne vois pas d'autres demandes de la part des membres du comité. La liste est ouverte aux partis ayant statut d'observateur. Brésil.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I would like to note the difference again between the Spanish and the English versions of the document. On page 8, third paragraph, the English version deleted the expression determine the feasibility, but that was not updated in the Spanish version, where we can still read determinar la viabilidad. So for moving with our general comments, Brazil would like to express its sincere appreciation to our co-chairs for guiding the work of the in-session working group with such balance, dedication, and patience. We also thank all parties and stakeholders who engaged constructively throughout our 2 sessions and contributed to the consensus reflected in the agreed terms of reference. Brazil is fully aware of the difficult financial situation currently faced by the Secretariat. For this reason, we believe it is all the more important that parties and other stakeholders respond to the call contained in Decision 20.243. Decision 20.243 urges parties, intergovernmental organizations, non-governmental organizations, commercial traders, the music industry, and other interested stakeholders to provide financial support for the implementation of Decisions 20.239 and 20.240, including research on many of the activities reflected in the terms of reference for the studies on traceability and the development of conversion factors. We therefore urge all relevant stakeholders to respond to that call. We would also like to clarify that we do not consider the scope of the studies to have been expanded. Rather, through our joint work with other parties and stakeholders, the terms of reference have been refined to ensure that the studies effectively address the key challenges for the conservation of Pau-Brasilia equinata. We therefore consider all elements reflected in the terms of reference to be essential and believe that all should ultimately be addressed. Pau-Brasilia equinata, or Brazil wood, gives its name to our country and has a well-documented history of colonial exploitation spanning more than 500 years. Its wood continues to be used today for the manufacture of high-quality bowls for stringed instruments, largely from Brazil wood stocks held outside Brazil. The urgency is clear. Brazil's latest national scientific assessment reclassified the species from endangered to critically endangered. the highest category of extinction risk before extinct in the wild. We have a collective responsibility to ensure that the studies are carried out and that the knowledge they generate support the long-term conservation of the species. Brazil believes that the studies must proceed in accordance with the agreed terms of reference. Current resource constraints should not prevent the implementation of the mandate agreed by the Conference of the Parties. Thank you.
Merci à la représentante du Brésil. La liste pour les demandes de parole est ouverte aux observateurs. S'il n'y a pas d'autres partis en statut d'observateur qui voudraient s'exprimer, nous avons les États-Unis.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. The United States appreciates the outcomes of the in-session working group. We note that Mandate C of the in-session working group called for identifying whether there are specific concerns relating to the application of source codes A and Y for Pau Brasilia echinata for consideration by both the range, state, and importing parties. We would like to request that the Plants Committee consider establishing an intercessional working group to continue consideration of this issue. Based on information available to the United States, there may be plantations of Pau Brasilia echinata in countries beyond Brazil. And as an importing party, we would welcome further technical discussion of the applicability of these source codes. Given that some relevant expertise and interested importing parties may not have been represented at this meeting, an intercessional working group would provide an opportunity for broader input and support the committee's consideration of this matter. Thank you, Chair.
Merci à la représentante des États-Unis. Y a-t-il d'autres demandes de parole et les observateurs? La France, vous avez la parole.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Alors je suis désolé d'intervenir, de demander la parole un peu tardivement. J'écoutais l'intervention des États-Unis et effectivement, on peut comprendre que certains points n'ont pas peut-être pas été assez développés lors du groupe de travail et principalement sur la question des sources, qui est un point effectivement assez sensible. Et si certaines autres parties estiment que ces travaux devraient se poursuivre dans un groupe de travail intersessionnel, si de nouvelles discussions sont nécessaires, la France est ouverte à également y participer. Merci.
Merci aux représentants de la France. D'autres demandes de parole, partis ayant statut d'observateur et observateur? Canada.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm speaking on behalf of Canada, not as a co-chair of this working group. Canada's view is that the matter of source codes is of domestic implementation of the treaty, and thinks that bilateral engagement would be a better use of our time rather than setting up an intersessional working group for such a limited scope. Thank you, Chair.
Merci, le Canada. Je vous reviens dans quelques instants pour la conclusion. Merci. Alors, concernant la version en espagnol, les modifications seront apportées. Maintenant, la question qui se pose, on a les États-Unis qui ont demandé que le comité établisse un groupe de travail intercession pour approfondir les conclusions du groupe de travail relatives au point C du mandat de ce groupe de travail. Nous avons la coprésidente de ce groupe de travail qui dit que ce ne serait pas pertinent d'avoir un groupe de travail en intercession. Aussi, je me retourne vers les membres du comité pour savoir quelle est votre position. Faut-il, donc vous devez répondre oui ou non à la question sur l'établissement d'un groupe de travail en intercession, oui ou non. Région Amérique centrale, du Sud et Caraïbes, vous avez la parole.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Yo, como representante regional de América Central, del Sur y el Caribe, respaldo lo expresado por la representante de Canadá. Gracias, señora presidenta.
Merci aux représentants de la région Amérique centrale, Sud et Caraïbes. Donc pas de création, pas d'établissement de groupe intercession sur ce point C du mandat du groupe de travail. Y a-t-il d'autres membres du comité pour les plantes qui aimeraient se prononcer là-dessus? C'est vraiment important pour qu'on puisse conclure sur ce thème. Donc vous me dites oui ou non pour que je puisse décider. Asie, j'ai l'impression que vous voulez dire quelque chose. Non? Océanie.
Thank you, Chair. I support Canada and the member for Central South America and the Caribbean.
Merci, Océanie. D'autres demandes de parole de la part des membres? Bon, il semble qu'il n'y ait pas de soutien en vue de l'établissement d'un groupe de travail en intercession sur le point C du mandat du groupe de travail. Aussi, nous allons conclure comme suit. Le comité pour les plantes convient des recommandations. Excusez-moi, je reviens vers vous.
The recommendations and the observations made, maybe, and then invite the secretary to.
Okay. Is this one?
This one and this one.
Okay. And inviter le comité encourage. C'est ouvert. Ok, donc conclusion sur le document PC 28 comme 4. Le comité pour les plantes convient des recommandations figurant dans le document PC 28 comme 4 et prend note des observations formulées en séance plénière. Le comité invite le secrétariat à tenir compte de la portée révisée des études et, le cas échéant, à mettre à jour l'estimation des coûts. Le comité encourage les partis, les organisations internes gouvernementales, les organisations non gouvernementales, les négociants commerciaux, l'industrie de la musique et les autres parties prenantes intéressés, concernés, à mettre en œuvre la décision 20-243. C'est ainsi la conclusion sur le document PC 28 comme 4. Avez-vous des objections sur cette conclusion? Non. Le document PC 28 comme 4 est clos. Examen du PC 28 comme 5. Il s'agit du groupe de travail sur l'étude de commerce important qui a été présidé par le vice-président du comité pour les plantes, qui est le représentant de la région Océanie. Vous avez la parole pour nous présenter le document.
Thank you, Chair. As Chair of the Working Group on New Species Country Combinations under the Review of Significant Trade, I'm pleased to introduce PC 28 Com5 for the consideration of the Plants Committee. The Working Group was established in accordance with paragraph 1B of Resolution Conf 12.8, Rev Cop 18, and our mandate is as follows. A, review the information contained in the annexes to document PC 28 Doc 14.4, as well as any additional available information. And B, recommend a priority list of 12 species country combinations of greatest concern for inclusion in stage 2 of the review of significant trade, and an explanation for the selection, as well as list of 5 additional species country combinations that may be included subject to available funding. The working group had 4 Plants Committee members, including myself, 40 observer parties and 12 observer organisations. The recommendations presented in the document reflect a focused assessment of reported trade patterns, including high volume trade, sharp increases in trade, species of conservation concern, and issues requiring clarification or follow-up. The working group established an initial long list of 26 species country or genera country combinations. Parties identified in the list were provided the opportunity to present statements and information as to why they should not be included. Parties not in attendance at the Plants Committee meeting in Geneva were provided with an opportunity to respond via regional representatives. A final list of 9 species country combinations were identified and are presented in the document for inclusion in the next stage of the review. Given there are less than 12 species country combinations identified in the priority list, the working group did not proceed with prioritising an additional 5 species country combinations as proposed in the mandate. In addition to identifying species country combinations for possible inclusion in stage 2, the working group has set out a series of related observations concerning data discrepancies between exporting and importing parties, guidelines for annual reporting, the methodology utilised in the assessment presented in the annex, and the need for advice on the treatment of species country combinations when considering matters where reservations are concerned. I would like to thank the members, observer parties, observer organisations and the Secretariat for your assistance throughout the discussions. And of course, I extend a sincere thank you to the interpreters for your assistance to support the working group members. On behalf of the working group, I invite the Plants Committee to consider the proposed list and make recommendations to the Standing Committee as presented in the document. Thank you, Chair.
Merci au président du groupe de travail. Je donne la parole aux autres membres du comité pour d'éventuels commentaires. Asie.
Merci, Madam Chair. We ran out of time yesterday to go through several Asian cases. Given the mandate that we needed a lengthy list, frankly speaking, we would much rather keep the list short And this is not just a wish from Asian members. In our opinion, the shorter the RST list, the better it demonstrates how well the convention works and reflects the compliance and growing capacity of all parties in fulfilling their convention obligations. Let's look at some Asian examples, starting with India's Dalbergia latifolia. After COP17, India puts in a reservation for the entire Dalbergia genus. As a result, India is regarded as a non-party for species under this genus. From our perspective, India's Dalbergia latifolia should not be placed on the RST list. We now take Kyrgyzstan's Rhodiola kirillovi as another example. The whole Rhodiola genus was newly listed at COP19 in 2022 and took effect on 2023. Accordingly, it does not satisfy the 5-year medium-term review, and the volume recorded are not high. In addition, the CITES listing of rhodiola has brought about a sharp drop in trade of wild specimens thanks to the traceability mechanism set up under CITES. Given the above grounds, we respectfully request that both Dalbergia latifolia from India and Rhodiola kirillovi from Kazakhstan be removed from the review of the significant trade list. Madam Chair, I would say it is our honor for us as Asian representatives to share our delight at the solid achievements of Asian parties in fulfilling their convention obligations for plant species. As members of Plants Committee, we are also proud of the process of the committee and your leadership. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci à la représentante de la région Asie. Région Amérique centrale du Sud et Caraïbes, vous avez la parole.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Voy a hablar también en nombre de Paraguay, que por la combinación de Vulnesia sarmentoi que fue incluida para ese país en la lista, ya que Paraguay no reúne los elementos que justifican su inclusión en el RST. La documentación presentada por Paraguay previamente a este comité de flora está incluida como documento informativo en inglés y en español, INF10, y aclara que el criterio de incremento pronunciado utilizado en la selección preliminar obedece a anomalías en los datos comerciales derivados del desfasaje entre la vigencia de los cupos nacionales, la emisión de permisos CITES y el registro en la base de datos de comercio de CITES, así como a inconsistencias materiales detectadas en los informes anuales y no a un incremento real del aprovechamiento de la especie. Asimismo, Paraguay informó las acciones previas para corregir los errores detectados en los datos reportados. Asimismo, el comercio autorizado continúa sustentándose en dictámenes de extracción no perjudicial elaborados en atención a información científica y biológica y disponible en consonancia con las orientaciones de las CITES. También Paraguay dice que observa que este grupo de trabajo recomendó a la Secretaría y a la UNEP WCMS colaboren con otras partes para conciliar y corregir discrepancias detectadas en la base de datos sobre el comercio de las CITES. Se considera que Paraguay ha documentado técnicamente discrepancias de naturaleza similar, por lo cual se solicita respetuosamente ser incluido en dicho proceso de trabajo en condiciones de coherencia e igualdad de trato con las demás partes, respecto de las cuales también se han identificado discrepancias existentes en la base de datos de comercio de CITES. Por lo tanto, Paraguay solicita retirar esta especie y combinación de la lista. Gracias, señora presidenta.
Merci à la représentante de la région Amérique centrale et du Sud et Caraïbes. L'Europe, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Chair. So just a few edits to start with. So with regards to the membership of the Review of Significant Trade, the representative for Europe, which was myself on the first day, and then the alternative representative for Europe, Mr. Daniel Wolf, attended on the second day, and Mr. de Boer did not attend. With regard to some of the species mentioned here, so with the Asia representative inputs on Rhodiola curculowii, we would still suggest, though it is a recent listing, we would still suggest the volume is high, and we would definitely like a look at that. With regard to the reservation, we find that there's various kind of thoughts about a party having a reservation in Article 10 of the Convention, that basically re-export and export is basically comparable documentation issued. It does not give a party carte blanche to kind of escape any of the rules or any of the scrutiny. So we feel there has been a lot of debate about that. So we would have definite kind of input and different articles and resolutions that would say the provisions basically apply to parties, you know, even if they're in reservation. And then with regards to Bolnesia sarmientoi from Paraguay, we welcome the extra information, but believe that a lot of work has gone into putting together this short list. And I think it's just an opportunity really for just to have us look a little bit closer at this particular trade in the region. So thank you. So we would oppose any of the removals of these species from the list. Thank you.
Merci à la représentante de la région Europe. Je ne vois pas d'autres demandes de parole des membres du comité. J'invite donc, voilà, il y a une demande de parole, Afrique.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for this position to speak. I also, in line with Asia, that yesterday we had a little time to discuss further or more on the species. And here I would like to speak that some of the species which were discussed or have been proposed, that after critical review on the data which have provided by the parties, show that the harvesting levels was not exceed variable information we had. So we think that for species which we think that the harvesting is still sustainable, and have been listed recently, as my colleague from Asia region has spoken, that we could not list at this position now for to take it now as part of listing, and it can be reserved for further or for future observations, so that we can get a long trend of data on the trade. Because what we have reviewed, for example, with the Vitelcarpus tinctorius, a case from Tanzania, it showed that the harvesting was not, the harvesting level does not exceed the sustainability of the trees. But the records which were observed from the study by WCMC, that there was a pale stock of the wood for particular years because of the closure of the trade by the internally. So the wood observed that was not harvested within 1 year. It was taken in a cumulative manner. So we think that even though the mandate for the working group was to list 12 species, I think it cannot be in that manner, but we can also think otherwise that for the species which do not meet the criteria should not be taken on board. Otherwise, we could take the species and observe more for other coming years to see the progress in trade so that we can use the basic science which we have. In addition to that, the three species which have been observed, they have good management plans which show how management has been taken by the parties. So, Madam Chair, I could request, as my colleague from Asia said, that we could reserve those some species which do not have much effect on being listed and RST for at this stage, so that we can observe more the trade levels in the future or in the next PC meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Merci aux représentants de la région Afrique. L'Asie, vous avez de nouveau la parole.
Merci, Madam Chair. And we also thank the African region for their support. And last night, we got some legal folks to look into the relationship between the reservations and the RST, and the related note has been sent to all the committee's members for your understanding. Maybe our other representative can translate it, use some AI translator, but we think that the legal context is fairly clear, and we wish we all, implement the CITES in this way that all the parties have their common knowledge. Thank you, Chair.
Merci à la représentante de la région Asie. Je donne la parole à la Fédération de Russie.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель. В первую очередь хотели бы поддержать выступления коллег, представляющих регион Азии и Африки. В первую очередь хотели бы обратить внимание на несоблюдение правил отбора комбинации вид-страна по радиоле из Киргизии. Согласно подпункту А пункта 1 приложения 2 резолюции 12.8, обзор значительной торговли видами. Выбираемым периодом для оценки берется статистика ежегодных отчетов, показывающая зарегистрированный уровень прямого экспорта для видов приложения 2 за последние 5 лет. Радиола была включена после конференции сторон 19, и правила СИТЕС по виду начали действовать с 2023 года. Это свидетельствует о некорректности для отбора, так как отсутствует 5 лет оценки, а также отсутствует понимание о высоком росте. Отсутствует информация, не с чем сравнивать. Субъективное восприятие не является основанием. Для этого действуют правила в Конвенции, чтобы подходить обоснованно и объективно. Мы благодарим коллег из Киргизии, которые, несмотря на невозможность присутствия сегодня на комитете, предоставили информацию также в секретариат о принимаемых мерах и подходе по регулированию и контролируемому сбору радиолы. В Киргизии действует национальная система, как было отмечено коллегами из Киргизии, и проводится ежегодный мониторинг, соответственно, по виду. Повторно обращаем внимание на несоблюдение резолюции по данному виду в части его отбора, в связи с чем мы не можем поддержать данную комбинацию. Спасибо.
Merci à la représentante de la Fédération de Russie. La parole est accordée à la Tanzanie.
Thank you, Chair. Also, United Republic of Tanzania aligns safe with the comment raised by the representative from Asian region, African region, as well as Russia Federation. Our intervention regarding the proposed listing of inclusion of Pterocarpus tinctorius from Tanzania into the RST. Madam Chair, as mentioned previously, Pterocarpus tinctorius is currently listed as listed concern in IUCN Red List Assessment, and the harvest in Tanzania is based on the available science and research and best practice. The allowable quota that we have developed, approximately 110,000 cubic meters, but our harvest has been conservative. We are harvesting only 24% of what is allowable under the assessment which has been carried out by our scientific authority. But also the export has been less, is only 50% of the harvest. Madam Chair, the sharp increase in export noted in 2024, I think it was caused by the export ban, which was instituted back in 2023 to allow the country to develop legal and regulatory framework to ensure that the trade is sustainable, traceable, as well as contribute to the local livelihood. Also, if you look at the data from 2024, when you can compare the data from 2024 and 2022, when we didn't have the ban, you could find that there is only a decline by 5.7% of the export in 2022, which also indicates that there is a sharp increase if you compare the data between 2022 and 2024. Unlike when you compare the data between 2023 when we had a restriction in the doing business. Madam Chair, as highlighted yesterday by the distinguished delegate from the Republic of Kenya, that the Animal Committee is currently considering a growing number of species that require scientific assessment and management attention. In this regard, Tanzania is of the view that the existing framework demonstrates that the species is being sustainably managed. We therefore respectively requested the committee to consider removing the species from the list and allow the limited technical and financial resources available under the CITES to be redirected toward the species facing greater conservation concern, particularly those under the consideration by the Animal Committee, where such resources could achieve a greater conservation impact. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci aux représentants de la Tanzanie. Je donne la parole à l'Allemagne.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to the representatives and the parties that gave additional explanations. With regard to the requests to remove species from the list, we believe that there have been concerns raised, and that's why they have been in the analysis by UNEP WCMC. We also believe that the review of significant trade is there to clarify whether this is a concern or not. And therefore, if there is no concern, step 2 will reveal that. And it's not a problem to stay in, because if you can show that there is no problem, then you're out after step 2. And therefore, we request to keep the species country combination in the list, which have been requested to be deleted, removed. Thank you.
Merci à l'Allemagne. Afrique du Sud.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would also want to point out that it is our understanding that species have to meet one of those 5 criteria in the analysis, in the extended analysis, and neither rhodiola nor Pterocarpus angolensis Angola meet any of those criteria. That is why they're they're presented in Annex 2, so not in the extended analysis. They're presented in the additional information. So actually the table is incorrect. For Pterocarpus angolensis angola does not meet the high volume criterion. I remember from the discussion in the working group that it was something about management plans, but it is incorrect that it meets that criterion, and similarly for rhodiola. Otherwise, they would have been presented in Annex 1. Thanks.
Merci à la représentante de l'Afrique du Sud. États-Unis, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Chair. We appreciate the opportunity to provide information on the U.S. management of wild American ginseng exports. Unfortunately, during the working group, there was not enough time to provide all this information. The United States has submitted an information document, PC28-INF16, containing additional clarifying information along with the NDFs from 2023 to 2025. To succinctly summarize, the United States has a comprehensive system to implement Article 4 of CITES. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service conducts legal acquisition and non-detrimental findings based on annual state and tribal harvest data, biological information, trade data, and other scientific evidence. As seen in the provided non-detriment findings, American ginseng is managed through coordinated federal, state, tribal programs that include minimum age requirement for harvest licensing and harvest certification, monitoring and enforcement, and annual reporting. The United States and Native American tribes must meet the U.S. states, and Native American tribes must meet federal CITES requirements to participate in the CITES export program for American ginseng. American ginseng remains widespread in the United States with more than 4,000 known occurrences and an estimated population exceeding 100 million individuals across North America. NatureServe ranks the species as vulnerable to apparently secure globally. Harvest is prohibited or restricted in extensive areas including National Park Service lands, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service lands, most national forests lands, state lands, private lands, conservation areas. This provides important refugia for wild populations. The United States has taken a precautionary approach to trade management. Since 1999, exports have been limited to roots harvested from plants at least 5 years old, and wild simulated production has been conservatively managed within the wild export program. According to the UNEP WCMC data from PC25 and PC28, exports of American ginseng have decreased by 76%, from 35,000 in 2014 to 8,000 kilograms in 2024. Thus, the trend countering the review of significant trade high volume. This change reflects increased regulation to support adaptive management aimed at reducing harvest pressure and maintaining long-term sustainability, including harvest closures and the estimate of no harvest area, or the establishment of no harvest areas. Taken together, these measures demonstrate that the United States is effectively implementing Article 4 and that American ginseng does not warrant inclusion in Stage 2 of the review of significant trade. Thank you.
Merci aux États-Unis. Pays-Bas, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And the Netherlands have a few comments
but I limited myself now to the first one, and that is a request to you as Madam Chair. We have now discussions on several species country combinations, and I find it a bit difficult to keep track of all the input brought to the table by the different parties. May I suggest that we discuss the individual country species combinations on a case-by-case rather than all mixed up in one huge pile? Thank you.
Merci aux représentants du Pays-Bas pour cette proposition de méthodologie. Je pense que nous allons suivre cela. Mais je note d'une façon générale que sur les 9... Attendez, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9. Sur les 9 combinaisons espèces pays, nous avons la demande de retrait de 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Donc voilà. Alors, nous allons donc procéder espèces combinaisons par pays et je demanderai donc aux membres du comité de répondre à la question suivante, maintien ou retrait. Alors, pour la première espèce, pour la première combinaison, il s'agit d'Aquilaria filaria, Indonésie. Je m'excuse pour les partis ayant statut d'observateur qui voulaient s'exprimer. Si vous pouvez, je vous donnerai la parole après. Pour l'instant, donc on va faire, comme cela nous a été suggéré, espèces, pays, l'une après l'autre. Et si vous voulez vous exprimer sur l'une des combinaisons, vous prendrez la parole. Donc Namibie, Portugal, si vous pouvez retirer vos demandes de parole. Merci. Et donc je m'adresse aux membres du comité pour la première combinaison Aquilaria filaria, Indonésie. Êtes-vous pour son maintien ou pour son retrait? La parole est donnée à l'Indonésie. Excusez-moi, la parole est donnée à la région Asie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The information provided by Indonesia during the working group demonstrated precautionary and science-based approach to sustainable harvest management. And also, we note that the quota setting is supported by scientific information on the species potential stock, providing an important basis for ensuring that harvest level remains sustainable. Therefore, we support to remove Aquilaria filaria from the list of RST. Thank you, Chairs.
Merci aux représentants de l'Asie. Europe, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Chair. We would request that we keep this species in due to the high volume in trade, the sharp increases. It's a vulnerable species and only wild source material in trade. So for that reason, we would like to keep it in.
Je vous assure que ça va être difficile d'avoir une conclusion à ce rythme-là. Est-ce que nous avons d'autres demandes de parole de la part des membres du comité? Non, partis ayant statut d'observateur, prière de vous exprimer sur le maintien ou non de la première combinaison espèce-pays proposée. Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Zimbabwe believes that parties are the best protectors of their flora resources, and the parties concerned are the ones that have got the responsibility to implement this decision. And this too is just meant to assist us to monitor sustainability, of course being mindful of the precautionary principle, but it comes with costs as well. So if there's no willingness on part of the parties, given the information being provided, and if there's no criteria, the criteria is not being met fully, I would suggest that we remove those species and work with the parties that are willing to cooperate on implementing these two, unless if those parties that are insisting have got the resources to provide those parties, because it costs parties to do those things. Thank you.
Merci à la représentante du Zimbabwe. La parole est donnée au Portugal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Regarding this species, we share the concerns already expressed by the representative of Europe. The species is endangered, and there are reasons to keep it on the list. I asked previously for intervention because there is some arguing in this meeting regarding the possibility or not of discussing species recently listed that have no data in the CITES database. I just wonder why resolution 12.8 Rev COP 13 states very clearly the Secretariat shall request UNEP WCMC to produce within 90 days after each meeting of the Conference of the Parties a summary from the CITES database of annual report statistics showing the recorded net value of exports for Appendix 2 species over the 5 most recent years. However, species listed at the 2 last COPs have not yet reached a level of data of 5 years. So we wonder why were those species included in documents presented to this committee in view of the analysis of the review of significant trade, because of course they don't have 5 years of data trade data in the CITES database. So we wonder, are we working just for a matter of trying to elaborate on these issues, or are we really evaluating the need of a species to be included in the review of significant trade? And I just wanted to add that regarding Pterocarpus angolensis, it is on the document on the result of the working group, the I-trade, but the reason was effectively, as the colleague from South Africa expressed, the absence of forest management plans and the absence of NDF due to the fact that there was no scientific authority in Angola able to produce that NDF. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci aux représentants du Portugal. Donc, en conclusion, qu'est-ce que vous demandez, par exemple, que l'espèce Rhodiola kyrilloui, Kyrgyzstan, que cette combinaison soit retirée parce qu'elle elle date de moins de 5 ans, et ainsi que Pterocarpus angola, c'est ça? Le angolensis angola, c'est bien ça? Portugal. Yeah, Portugal.
Thank you, Chair. I just believe that there is no reason to take from the list any species due to the fact that there are no 5 years of data. Otherwise, they would be discussed in this committee and it would be present in the documents that were sent to the parties by the Secretariat. Thank you, Madam.
Merci au Portugal d'avoir apporté ces précisions. Donc nous revenons sur la première combinaison, Aquilaria, Filaria, Indonésie et Pays-Bas. Vous avez la parole. Indonésie, d'abord, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Chair. Indonesia aligns with the view expressed by the Asian group to exclude Aqualaria filaria in the RST shortlist. To address the concern from the EU and several members, yesterday we have clearly stated that Indonesia has provided quite a strong evidence on the declining trend. We also have provided information on precautionary quota reduction and results of scientific assessment, which conducted in West Papua. We also would like to highlight that there is findings from peer-reviewed scientific publication demonstrating that Aqualaria filaria persists across an exceptionally large landscape where the high trade volumes reflect natural abundance, not elevated harvest pressure. So from our information that we have provided to the committee, we believe that there's some concern from the EU is not appropriate, it's not correct. So that's why we are respectfully request to the committee to exclude Aqualaria filaria from the RST list. I thank you, Chair.
Merci aux représentants de l'Indonésie. Pays-Bas, vous avez la parole.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll keep it very short. Noting the rationales and comments made by other parties, we suggest to keep Aqualaria filaria Indonesia in the review of significant trade. Thank you very much.
Merci, Pays-Bas, pour cette brève réponse. Allemagne, j'attends de vous aussi une brève réponse.
Thank you, Chair. We align ourselves with the comments made by the European region and by the Netherlands and would like to keep the species in the list, and we would request or invite Indonesia, if everything is fine and in full compliance with Article 4, to share all these informations via the RST process, and that the RST process therefore a good chance to ensure that everything is fine and to maybe then be released in the next steps. Thanks.
Alors, je vais m'adresser au président du groupe de travail. Après tous les échanges qu'il y a eu en plénière, que pensez-vous? Est-ce que ces points de vue ont été pris en considération lors des travaux du groupe de travail que vous avez présidé? Après votre réponse, je reviendrai vers les membres du comité pour qu'on conclue, parce que nous avons 9 combinaisons espèces pays. On risque de s'éterniser sinon. Alors, vous avez la parole, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I think it is difficult with the time that we have to obviously go through all of the information presented during the working groups. I believe that we need to take a consistent approach across both the Animals and Plants committees. We've had instances where parties have requested to be removed based on the information provided, but still been retained. If parties are of the belief that the trade is of concern and the parties identified in species country combinations can provide that information, then maybe it needs to go through the RST, but I just, I guess, ask for consistency in all these cases to ensure that we're being fair to everybody across both Animals and Plants Committee.
La question que l'on se pose, c'est est-ce que cette combinaison espèce-pays a répondu au moins à l'un des 5 critères qui lui permettent d'être, qui conduisent à son inscription en étude dans le processus de l'étude de commerce important. Donc, je vais revenir vers les pays membres. Et je pense que je vais donner la parole région par région pour retenir votre avis. Donc, région Afrique, que pensez-vous de la combinaison, de la première combinaison? Faut-il maintenir ou la retirer au vu des échanges que nous avons eus dans la salle? Afrique, vous avez la parole.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. With regards to Africa region, on the speech combination in first one, we concur with the chair of the working group. So we think that the working group's observations are relevant. Thank you. For the first
Donc, vous êtes pour le maintien de cette espèce dans la liste, dans le processus. Parce que je vous demande, est-ce que vous voulez que Aquilaria filaria Indonésie soit maintenue ou retirée de ce tableau? Ok, merci Afrique. Donc vous êtes pour le maintien de la combinaison? Non, c'est non.
No. Yes, Chair. Based on the evidence provided by the region, we are in a position that we do not keep the species to the RST. So, according that the region provided reasons that they should be kept, should not be taken on the list for being within the RST. Thank you.
Ok, donc vous êtes pour le retrait. Ok, Asie.
Thank you, Chair. We still stand with our decision to remove the first combination from the list. Thank you.
Merci, Asie. Amérique centrale, du Sud et Caraïbes.
Disculpas. Gracias, señora presidenta. También estamos a favor de que se retire.
Merci. Europe.
Thank you, Chair. And again, Europe would still keep Aquilaria filaria from Indonesia on the list, again, due to the scientific reasons we pointed out, the high volumes, the unclear population status, harvest impact, and no NDF in place. We don't find enough of the argument against the scientific basis of removal here. Thank you.
Merci à la région Europe, Amérique du Nord.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Pues seguimos en consulta sin poder llegar a un acuerdo. Por el momento nos abstenemos de opinar en este punto. Gracias.
Merci. Océanie.
Thank you, Chair. As Chair of the Working Group, I will stand by what's in the report. I listened to what was on the floor and I took advice from the members that were in attendance and the parties and observer organisations. So I will go with what is in the report.
Merci. Ok, je pense que nous allons ajourner la session. Nous allons reprendre les travaux à 14 h comme prévu pour finaliser ce point à l'ordre du jour. Je vous remercie. Merci aux interprètes.